welcome back to all of you. I hope you had a great coffee break and you stretched your legs. In order to have a great experience, remember, you can use the networking app. Here in your screen, you will find the QR code, so do not hesitate to use it. And okay, we are going to talk about a very, very trendy topic, the digital therapeutics. I would like to welcome Pascal Lardier, the Vice President of Events and Media Content and HIMSS, who will be moderating this session. So welcome, Pascal, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Elena. What a great pleasure it is to be back at the Barcelona Health Hub and to discuss such an important topic as digital therapeutics. We have a great panel today, and in a few minutes I will ask them to introduce themselves. But we have, you know, a lot of different people listening to us for this session, and I wanted to start by trying to define what we call digital therapeutics. It has become a buzzword in the last, you know, I would say 5 to 10 years. We're all talking about it, but it's a little bit like value-based care. We also talk about it, but not in a strict definition. So to go to the most neutral definition, I went to Wikipedia. And this is how they define digital therapeutics. It's evidence-based, digital therapeutic intervention in complement or replacement of a drug treatment to prevent, manage, or treat a medical disorder or disease. So this is the definition that we will start with today. And I'm going to start by asking all the people on our panel to introduce themselves, present their specific interest in the topic that we're exploring today, and if you would like to add anything or change anything to this pretty generic definition. Guido Senatore, I have the pleasure of being here with you at the Barcelona Health Hub, so maybe we'll start with you. A few words of introduction. Who are you? What is your implication or involvement with DTX? This is also another way to call digital therapeutics. And do you agree with this definition to start with?
Yeah, cheers, Pascal. Good afternoon to all here. I'm Guido Senatore. I'm the medical director for Bayer in Spain. And not only my personal interest, but also as a medical team in a country like Spain, our interest in DTX is to be part of the innovation, not as a nice to have thing, but also to can have a direct implication in better health outcomes for our patients. And following on your definition, I think the key part for us, many of the pharma companies are part of DTX Alliance, and we define a number of things, but for me the highlight has to be that it's clinically proven. The health outcomes are there, the evidence are there. For that reason, it's not such a new thing to have, but also it's an approved intervention, scientifically proved intervention.
So evidence-based is a very important part of the definition. So I suggest that we go to our virtual panelist. And maybe ladies first. Celine, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Celine Ulmann. I'm leading the digital effort at Almirall on the research and development side. I've joined Almirall about a year ago, and as you know, Almirall is a dermatology-based company. So we feel strongly that digital therapeutics are a very interesting complement to our portfolio for multiple reasons. One being that most dermatology diseases are chronic disease, and we see that chronic diseases are of high interest for DTX because it puts the patients at the center of the treatment algorithm in those multimodal channels of treatment that they can experience. So this is a little bit my complement to the definition, if you want, is that it's supposed to provide a more holistic treatment approach for patients beyond the pill.
Very much, Celine. I think we can move maybe to Jonas from Kaya.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pascal. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonas Duss. I'm one of the co-founders of Kaya Health, where I first started off building clinical R&D partnerships, conceptualizing our therapy for COPD, and then moved more and more into a commercial role, building out our partnerships with life science and health plans. So first worked in Munich, Germany, and then moved to New York to build out our go-to-market and commercial team in the US, where I remain now since about 2 years. To add to your definition, maybe in our specific case, we are focusing on managing chronic conditions. So less on the prevention side, slightly touching the prevention side, but we would definitely not call it treating. Our approach specifically is to take existing mind-body therapies with a broad and solid body of evidence in a traditional clinical setting, and then we digitize them, we deliver them through the modality of the smartphone, and then we rebuild the evidence around that new modality of delivering them with randomized controlled trials.
Thank you, Jonas. And we will see a very short demo of Kaya to make sure that we have an example to illustrate what we call digital therapeutics. It wouldn't be a complete panel if we didn't have an investor with us. So Edward, would you please say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Great to see you again, Pascal, albeit virtually. So I'm a partner at Amadeus Capital Partners. We focus on scale-up stage opportunities in deep tech. And a large part of our focus is on healthcare technology, of which, of course, digital therapeutics is a large part. Now, in my previous capacity at M Ventures, where I'm still an advisor, M Ventures is the corporate venture capital arm of Merck, we actually were active in the DTX space all the way back since 2016, with our first investment in Akili Interactive Labs, which is widely recognized as being one of the leaders in this domain. So the reason we invested at that point in Akili was really threefold. The first one that I would like to endorse sort of what you're saying there is indeed evidence is key. So Akili had this large evidence base that allowed us the comfort to invest in the company. The second is that digital therapeutics really, in our definition, have to play to their own strengths. It's a unique proposition. It's a unique tool. One of our theories is that the biggest threat to humanity is delayed feedback, and digital therapeutics have the ability to shorten that feedback loop and bring a point of action closer to a point of onset of a disorder, or actually provide completely novel modalities. In the case of Akili, impacting cognition has never been done before. And the third part of the equation for us is demonstration of near-term value. So those are the three main definitions for us to invest in digital therapeutics and the way that we like to look at the space.
Well, thank you, Edward. As I was saying, we're going to start with a short video showing the work of Kaya. If we're ready to have it, let's do it. And I think, Jonas, you're going to run us through what we see on the video.
Absolutely. So the video will give you an idea of...
turns your smartphone into your own digital personal trainer. Kind of like having a therapist.
Stay quiet while we have the voiceover. So basically what you see is kind of how we use the technological layer to use tech for kind of the ideal delivery of those therapies. So we have a proprietary computer vision algorithm that we're trying to showcase here, which gives you corrections using just a selfie camera on the smartphone's local processor. So that basically is allowing us for the first time to use smartphone technology in the sense that we don't have to send anything to the cloud, and the battery is not completely drained after using this. And patients can safely exercise at home and actually also, get some feedback on how they're doing. So, for example, what you just saw there is we would check over time how their mobility, how their flexion is improving. We can correct them while they're doing exercises, but we can also just count exercises.
Okay. In the example that is shown on the video, we're talking about rehabilitation, or we're talking about pain management, a combination of both?
Yeah, so our evidence base is really mainly around chronic condition management. So we're mainly looking at chronic patients who we're trying to help to better manage their pain. And it is a mind-body therapy. What maybe you didn't see right now in the video is it consists of 3 parts. So it has a self-management education part in it. Then it has this physiotherapy part in it that you just saw. And then it also has a mindfulness and relaxation part where we use techniques such as mindfulness-based stress reduction, as well as progressive muscle relaxation and similar techniques.
Okay, and so we have a full view on Kaya. Can you say a few words about your business model? Are you selling direct to consumer, or is it a B2B2C, or what is your go-to market?
Yep. So maybe it makes sense to add some history to that. So we were founded in 2016, and up to date we've raised $50 million and published 6 clinical trials. When we started, this was very much still a B2C play. And so we started actually with a B2C model. And then as we built out our evidence, in parallel, we built relationships to health plans and are now actually purely on a B2B2C model. So the idea really is to get coverage reimbursement either from health insurance companies or directly national reimbursement, depending on the geography and depending on the legislation. So in the US, we're mainly working with health plans to sell to self-insured employers. In Europe, we rather work with life science to distribute our product and get it prescribed and reimbursed on the national level.
Yeah, I'm always amazed to see the difference between US and Europe when it comes to the involvement of employers. They really are very involved in the US, and I'm wondering and waiting for the moment that employers realize that this kind of tool can actually also, in the end, increase productivity, decrease absenteeism. But this is another discussion that we'll have another day. Thank you, Jonas. I'd like to turn to our friends who are representing the pharma industry on this panel. And I'd like to start with maybe a question that is a little bit controversial, but traditionally, pharma companies are there to produce new molecules and put new drugs on the market. And in the definition that we started with, we realized that it was in complement or in replacement of a drug or medication treatment. So my question is, we've seen a lot of support from the pharma company, and these are 2 great examples. And you will have an opportunity to let us know what you've done with startups in the DTX area. But isn't it a way to maybe, is there a risk that you're going to shoot yourself in the foot? Are you building a business that is actually competing with your core competency? How do you articulate the 2? Celine, maybe we can start with you, if you are okay with that?
No, absolutely. So I think the aim of a pharma company is to improve patients' lives. And I think, traditionally we have 200 years ago produced pills, small molecules, and that evolved. We went from small molecules to biologics, then we saw cell therapy, gene therapy, and now we're seeing DTX. I think the modality is changing, but I think the aim is remaining the same, which is really to help improve patients' lives. And so DTX is the new trend, like cell and gene therapy were a few years ago, because it has a lot of promises. And I think what the pharma companies want to do is to diversify their portfolio to reduce the risk and not shoot themselves in the foot, as you just said. And to do so, we need to test. We need to clinically test some of those new devices. We need to clinically test some of those new approaches, as we did in the past, and really see what has the highest efficacy, safety ratio profile for our patients, and whatever is best suited for them in terms of easily accessible, easily manageable for them on a day-to-day basis. This is what we need to go for.
About clinical validation, is this something that you're actually working with startups to to establish? It's not easy to establish evidence. Is that part of the partnerships that you have with your companies?
Yeah, indeed. And I think, this really reflects the willingness that we have to provide solid evidence when we put a product on the market. You can launch a comfort program, which is more of a patient support program, but a key partner in the equation is the practicing physician, and so for them to be on board with new therapies, whatever the modality, you need to show them evidence. And so I think producing evidence differs country from country, especially if you take the difference between the US and Europe. In the US, I've been there a few years back. I came to Europe 1 year ago, but in the US, I think the FDA is a little bit more advanced in the way they want to see DTX being developed, being tested, being approved through their process. In Europe, we're seeing pockets of geographies that are now taking measures to be able to provide the same framework. The DVG law in Germany, for instance, is a great example to how Europe also wants to get to this level of clinical evidence and requirements before prescribe anything to patients.
We're building more consistent frameworks, but what I'm hearing is that we're still at the national level. We don't have a unified European framework to evaluate solutions?
Not yet. And again, we're seeing pockets within Europe where really the progress is huge. And again, Germany is a great example for that. But I think there is willingness at the European level to test, see the benefit of those DTX, see what value it brings as well. I think it's a whole. DTX is a little bit of a different animal where we're not only looking at safety and efficacy, but also value-based outcome. And so I think as we're testing some of those combinations in European countries, it will incentivize the rest of Europe to embark on that new journey.
Thank you, Celine. I'm going to turn to Guido. The interest and involvement of Bayer and Grants for Apps, by extension, in digital therapeutics is definitely not new. It's been going on for a few years. Can you actually share a little bit about what is your angle? What are you trying to achieve? How does it integrate with the rest of your offering as a pharma company?
Okay, it's a good question, and I think Celine did a lot of work for me in order to pave the way to explain what is the angle of the pharma company. As Bayer, we put the patient in the center of all what we do, and I think digital therapeutic and digital health in some point use the empowerment of the patient to for them to be part of their own treatment. For us, the digital roadmap that we have as a strategy, as a company strategy, is something that, as you say, is not new and is here to stay. We know that we are aiming to some specific therapeutic areas with high medical unmet needs, and we know that we have to complement, or we have to put together, or we have to develop an innovative therapeutic approaches to that unmet needs. Just to give you an example, we can talk about women's healthcare, we can talk about cardiovascular diseases or chronic diseases, and oncology. The thing that we as a company, or us as a company, we are working in building expertise internally and externally. And as you say, Grant for Apps is a program that we are very much proud of. Started many years ago, and we can see not only the evolution that we have, but also the interest and the impact that we are having.
Follow-up question. Do you see nowadays digital therapeutics as something that will always be complementing an offering that is already existing, or do you see it as something that could become a new business unit, meaning having its own, new business area?
Yeah, definitely, it's a great question, and I think to give you a straight answer from the medical part of the company is a yes. We as a company, we are open to explore the possibility to have a different kind of business going beyond the pill, as we must say, but thinking in effective therapeutics approaches to specific therapeutic areas that we are interested or we are being involved to.
Okay. I'd like to turn to Edward now, if we can. And I'd like to have his point of view from an investor perspective. We said already several times that evidence was a key word here. And I wanted to know, as an investor, what are the key criteria that you're looking at in order to, decide, yes, maybe I should engage in discussions with this company? Or are there any big no-nos that you already know that you will not talk to this company because of this or that?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. I think coming from the top, what a lot of founders and entrepreneurs perhaps fail to recognize is the model of venture capital. And I'll try and simplify it a little bit. But let's say, for simple mathematics, we're investing from a 100 million fund. We're investing in 20 companies. That means approximately 5 million per company. But about 2 of those companies have to return the fund. So that means that some of these companies, where we are a minority shareholder, will have to become unicorns. Now, the only way that they become unicorns is by generating revenues and generating operating margins that actually allow for that. So by that measure, the markets that people are going after have to be huge. Venture capital is rocket fuel. It is something that it comes with very high expectations of return. So therefore, it's a tool that has to be carefully assessed. If a company, for example, goes for a local offering, there's nothing wrong with that. But then perhaps a local bank loan is a better solution to actually get to the point where the startup wants to go. So that's the first part for us. How big is the market and how realistic is it to get there within a limited time frame? And then the second part, indeed, is does the company play to its strengths? And that really comes down to the barriers to entry. We believe that digital therapeutics, as I alluded to before, has the ability to really cut down the feedback cycle and sort of like mitigate for delayed feedback, which is one of the biggest challenges in healthcare in general, but in human existence, I would almost like to say, as a whole. So does the solution play to those strengths? And then lastly, is there an ability to actually get to those near-term revenues? Is there an ability to get to that near-term value proposition? And I think what Celine said is very interesting there, because we see that a lot of individuals and a lot of companies confuse regulatory approval with reimbursement, and those two things are vastly different. You can build up evidence, you can get regulatory approval as such. That's very interesting for indeed enabling those barriers to entry. But your business model ultimately will come from generating the revenues that are desired. And there's multiple channels for that. Now, of course, getting reimbursement will reduce the friction in consumer uptake, therefore lower your customer acquisition cost, and ultimately increase your potential to really make those revenues that could potentially underpin the valuations that we are looking for. But that's a different discussion to be had. And there, indeed, I think Celine is very right. There's a fragmented universe in Europe. And in the US, it's somewhat more one-dimensional, with a lot of the payers being the employers.
Thank you, Edward. I might want to go back to Jonas for a question on, if you look at the history since 2016, you said was the year of your, you created the company. What would you say were the turning point? I mean, Kaya is nowadays considered a success story. A lot of people are, trying to do something similar, maybe in different therapeutic areas. What would you say were the turning points in the history of Kaya?
I think there's been many. I think as this field has been emerging over the past years, we had to pivot several times as a company as well, changing our focus. So maybe one first point, I think, was just to being a European company, and in Europe having a rather strict regulatory framework, having to go through all of these processes early on. That was a lot of work, and that was a rather dark period where we had to, we had a small user base. We still had to get a quality management system in place, get regulatory approval from the notified body in Germany, and at the same time try and build out our business, right? So it was really kind of just operating in this gray area. Obviously always sticking to the law, but being willing to take a little bit the risks where they're appropriate to take, where there was not a lot of clarity. Then, of course, go to market to the US when when is the right point in time? When do we really double down on our investment there? I think that was another turning point when we really entered that market, which is a very competitive market. And then probably also just deciding, okay, which indication are we going to focus on in which market more? Kind of comes back to this topic of focus and again, kind of taking into consideration where do we find which need. In Europe, there is more of this framework of prescription digital therapeutics in place where you can go after national reimbursement and you sort of see a path to revenue with that. And in the US, we just saw there's a lot of companies that are maybe going first through regulatory. Obviously, it depends on the condition. We have a condition which is very highly prevalent. So for us, it was more like, okay, we take this population health approach, but deciding, yes, we're going to go after self-insured employers and we're going to work through health plans first, instead of saying, we're going to go the strict regulatory route and build all of the evidence before we include a first patient in our solution. I think that was another important decision point to make that decision and then go into the market like that.
Elements of your history. I think the follow-up question to our friends at Bayer and then after Almirai is, where do you see that sometimes these digital therapeutics company are missing the mark? They're missing the focus that they should have. And what kind of environment are you providing through Grants for App, but also sitting through the Garden, which is a new accelerator that is hosted here at Barcelona Health Hub. Maybe we start with you, Guido, and we follow up with you, Celine?
Yeah. For us, I think one of the evolution of our programs was just to think in two different kind of tracks. just to early startups or early companies when they have a good idea, but it's starting the idea of the development, and then we can go there not only with an investment, but also with the possibility of having this kind of a co-working area and direct support and even mentorship from at least from the pharma company point of view. And then we have also the second track, which is the more advanced. It's the idea of already established startups moving to some of the areas that we think that is an interest, and we think that we can work together. So there will be another kind of approaches with investment, co-creation, these kind of things. For me, and I think it's something that appears in every intervention in this panel, was the concept that besides to have a great medical intervention or medical tool or effective tool, we need to focus as well on a different kind of necessary steps, such as regulatory approval. Here we talk about reimbursement, but I don't want to leave aside the idea of HCP or medical doctors' education regarding these new tools. We need the doctors in order to be aware that these tools are effective and could be something that can be successfully used in their patients. So I think that is the thing that for me, it's quite important for every startup to think. It's not only to develop an effective tool, but also to help think out how this effective tool will arrive to a patient, which is the final step.
Celine, you've created the Garden, and it's still fairly recent, but you have a good number of companies here working at Barcelona Health Hub in your studio. You have a strong focus on dermatology, obviously. Is this an area where you see that digital therapeutics will have a very big impact? And what are you doing with your companies to guide them in the right direction and not make the mistakes that we're making 10 years ago at the very beginning of digital therapeutics?
Yeah, so I think just a word on the Garden. The Garden is, as you said, a startup accelerator that Almiral has launched last year. So we've had our first harvest in the 2019-2020 year. And we had the first 4 startups graduating a few weeks back, so that was a very big achievement for Almiral. By the way, the call for innovation for 2020-2021 is currently open, so if there's any startups in the room that are interested in being part of the ecosystem and the accelerator space, you still have a few days, I believe, to apply. I think that, to go back to your original question around why dermatology, and I want to go back to a point that I made earlier, is that honestly, chronic diseases are very difficult to manage because you have, comorbidities, and you have patients on multiple treatments, and they take 10-15 pills every day. They have to go to regular visits to different doctors. It's very complicated to manage, very expensive for systems. And so I think one of the ambition that pharma companies have with DTX is to be able to provide those holistic solutions beyond the pill, as Guido was alluding to earlier, and making sure that from an unmet medical need, we can provide a more global solution for patients, that they don't have to run to 20 different physicians, that they can have one centralized point of care that their treating physician can see their progress in between two visits, making sure that the patient is taken care of in between. This is also extremely important. And I think that's where, the pharma company startup interface is really, really strong, is that we have this ability to provide those multimodal solutions for patients, reducing the cost of care eventually at the end of the day as well, which is another element that is quite important for payers, as we mentioned earlier. And also the interesting thing starting from the pharma side is that we have an existing portfolio and we have unmet medical needs within this portfolio, which the startup can definitely help fill those gaps. While once we're on the market, we also have the ability to deploy a fairly comprehensive field force with, an ecosystem already in place with physician and healthcare centers. So I think those relationships are really win-win. I wouldn't say that the startups have, downfalls. They're just complementary to what pharma do, and what the startups can do, pharma cannot do it or not really well. So I think this is also a very nice balance of the agility that Jonas described with, those very powerful companies coming behind with the investment in the field force and all the rest of it.
It's nearly like a symbiotic kind of relationship, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also the important thing as Celine approaches it. I think it's a different kind of shapes, angles, and tools. So I think it's not only symbiotic, but also we end up in having better healthcare outcome for our patient, which is important. So I'm fully agree with Celine.
All right. I'd like to turn back to our investor, Edward. We're living in very, very extraordinary times. And we know that for investors, the number one thing that needs to happen is a good relationship with the team. We haven't been able to shake hands in many, many months. We haven't been able to meet in person in many months. Have we seen with the current outbreak, have we seen an acceleration of investments? Have we seen a decrease? And within the global category of digital health, what can we say about digital therapeutics in particular?
Yeah, there's no silver bullet answer to that. I think in the beginning of the year, it was quite clear that a lot of investors had a level of introspection. So did we, frankly. We looked at the portfolio, we assessed risks in the portfolio, understood what kind of upstream and downstream risks there were in the business models of each respective portfolio company, which ones we needed to allocate more money to, and which ones essentially were going to struggle and unfortunately we couldn't support. And I saw that across the board. Now, coming out of the summer, there has definitely been a level of I guess, acceptance. People understand that this is a new reality, and as such, the world will at least be in this composition for another year to come. So it's either closing up shop for everybody or just accepting that this is the new reality and moving forward. And the latter seems to predominantly be the case, mainly driven in our observation by low interest rates and desire for money to essentially return a yield, which in fixed income and traditional assets at this point is very, very challenging. So with a lot of money flowing into alternative assets and mainly in venture capital as well, we do see that there is actually quite a lot of money at this point available for startups. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that in the early stages, it's pretty much a seller's market at the moment. That's also the gap that at M&A we identified, which is why we at this point are looking at product market fit opportunities, which basically are companies that we look at and have either early revenue traction or have been de-risked on a commercial level. Because in Europe, due to its fragmentation, which my esteemed colleagues alluded to, there is unfortunately quite a lot of early stage capital available, or fortunately quite a lot of early stage capital available in respective geographies, but unfortunately not that much pan-European capital at that scale-up stage. And that's really the gap that we're looking to fill. So yeah, investments are there. I would say the market is risk on. and absolutely it is a very interesting time to raise money. How much the in-person aspect plays into it is very, very, very challenging to assess, because that has really not been tested. We have done investments basically getting a tour of the premises over Zoom. I mean, it is what it is.
Jonas, going back to Kaya, would you say that this current situation has maybe boosted the interest in the company? Have you seen a peak in the commercial traction, maybe? Things that people would do in studio, they now have to do at home. What have you noticed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a couple of figures for you. So from February to March 2020, when COVID first hit in a major way in kind of in the West, we saw a 32% increase in signups. We saw a 69% increase in active users, and we saw a 154% increase in overall modules being completed in the app. We saw also that when kind of the US started opening again back in May, numbers then leveled down a little bit again. So people, maybe chose to go outside a bit more, and then maybe they, left out one of their physical therapy units. But we saw really, I think the biggest spike we actually saw, the biggest single day spike was a 40% spike in usage of our MSK low back pain app. And then, of course, there's the interest. I think for investments, I can only voice what was just said before. There's continued interest, and also from our clients. We first saw in the US, because we're mainly selling to benefits departments, are often decision makers in employers, and so. With them, we saw first kind of tendency to put out decisions, because they were very busy with just the whole work from home aspect of organizing their workforce. And then we saw a vast increase in interest in getting a digital solution in place because of that work from home setting, and because of the work from home setting being something that we're going to deal with probably for the whole of 2021 still. Maybe even longer for certain companies.
This is great. First of all, congratulations. These are very impressive numbers. So very well done. If we can think of the time after COVID-19, we're not going to go back to the same reality, probably ever. We've just discussed the fact that there's a little bit of a silver lining for our industry and for the digital health, the digital therapeutics movement in general. How do we make sure that we continue to promote these evidence-based practices that make sense for everyone? We said it improves clinical outcomes, but it also improves financial outcomes, and the two are always very linked. So how do we make sure that in a world that is post-COVID, we don't go back to our old ways? We don't go back to sending people to their doctors, and what we can do from home with a simple telephone, like we just saw with Kaya, that we continue in that direction and really promote what makes most sense.
Yeah, at least for me, I think there is a lot of things that could not be undone. And in this ocean of uncertainty that was COVID-19 in the beginning, there is a couple of positive trends that could answer your question, that we will not be coming back to the way we practice medicine before COVID. First of all was the adoption rate of digital tools in everyday medicine, in everyday activities of medicine. And second, I think it was, coming back to this concept, the alphabetization of doctors regarding these kind of tools. I think it would prove that telemedicine could be used. A different kind of approaches were effective, even in this situation. And I think one of the challenges will be to apply the same kind of adoption rates or initiatives to chronic diseases, not only COVID, but chronic diseases. What will be the way that we can practice medicine, having this kind of not only improved health outcomes, as you say, and having positive financial impacts, but I'm quite optimistic about that the medicine will go out changed from the COVID experience.
So if I can try to sum up your response, probably the best way to continue promoting this movement needs to go through a greater engagement from the clinicians. We need to work on their literacy of digital tools, but we also need to, work on modifying their attitude toward these digital solutions.
Yeah, could be that. And we have our obligation, I think, also to provide better and improved digital therapeutics or in some point clinical tools for them. I think it's a mix of them, but we cannot have a successful digital therapeutic deployment without the clinician being involved and the patients, right? But the clinicians as a link, I think.
Thank you for this answer. I think I'd like to ask the same question to the rest of the panelists. How do we continue promoting what really makes sense from a clinical and financial perspective? Celine, maybe we can start with you. What is the one roadblock maybe that we need to work on, or what do we need to focus on?
Yeah, I have to agree with Guido. I think the physician plays a key role. I think he alluded to my answer at the very end of his response. I think the patient is also going to be absolutely key. I think during this period there was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety for a number of patients to eventually not have access to their treatment, not have access to their physician or center of care. And they've discovered, digital medicine platform that enabled them to continue their journey. And I think they found it quite convenient. This is at least some of the feedback that we got from patients to this day, is that from a patient convenience perspective, being able to be more digital was a real improvement to their way of care. And so I think, on top of, educating physicians to the upside of providing digital tools to their patient, there's also the patient's convenience around using those tools and being able to articulate their treatments around it on a day-to-day basis. So for me, there's also this aspect, and I don't really see patients going back to the old way of doing things because they found a way that is more suitable for them at this point.
Engagement that we need, we also need to nurture this consumer pool. People are expecting a health system and solutions that belong to our century, not the last one. So this is what I understand from your answer, that we also need to cultivate this pool from consumers that don't want to go back to our old ways.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Edward, what is your point of view on this?
So when we first started in 2016 looking at this space, we sort of had the notion that real change has to come from the inside out. And what I mean by that is coming from, let's say, health systems, coming from providers, etc. Now, over time, we've become to reverse that notion. And it really comes also from sort of like a retrospective analysis we did. And there's something that Jonas said, which is very, very interesting in this. When we looked at the majority of deals that were done in the last, let's say, 2 or 3 years in the digital therapeutic space, the majority of deals were companies that did not seek regulatory approval. However, there were 2 things that they did do. which is they were addressing payers' needs as well as patients' needs, and they were displaying the relevant levels of revenue margins. And those were the companies that really sort of like outperformed. In our portfolio, there's Progeny, in the Inventures portfolio, that is, as well as we've seen companies like Livongo sort of like cracking this nut. So that was the important part. Now, the benefit of a non-regulated market entry sort of is that you get this direct user feedback. Now, there's of course increased competition, and you have a different kind of spend, but it allows you the direct feedback. Now, the regulatory approval on the other side allows you sort of those barriers to entry. The point I'm going to is all these routes have one thing in common, and that is really providing a benefit to the patients. Because, mind you, a lot of the digital therapeutics that we see today are therapies. They're not just a single silver bullet pill that you take. So it requires sort of a level of adherence that is almost unheard of in the traditional therapeutic space. Therefore, if you don't provide patients with their benefits, unfortunately, the level of adherence will not persist. Therefore, the effect will not persist. Therefore, the drop-off rate will not be there. Therefore, the data will not be there. Therefore, the payers will not pay for it. And therefore, the product will not be successful. So we've come to reverse the notion that the true change has to come from the inside out. We believe it really has to come from the grassroots up. So providing a level of evidence and a level of benefit to the individuals. And mind you, coming back to, let's say, this fragmentation of the ecosystem in Europe, but even globally, there's one common denominator to it all, and that's the patient benefit. So playing to that strength will allow you scalability and allow you global impact.
We have 15 seconds left, but since Barcelona Health Hub was founded for startups, I'd like to give the final word to Jonas. What, in your experience, is the best way to continue pushing for that digital therapeutics movement?
Well, thanks so much. I'm honored. I think what is most important is that, everything that has just been said in the last two inputs, I would completely agree on. And I think another really important aspect is, understanding that. Let's make sure that we understand that these things are complementary to the current clinical services and the classical provider services. I don't think we are going to replace providers in any meaningful way. We're going to complement them. And so let's make sure that we proactively address where there may be financial conflicts of interest, and that we build partnerships where in the end we really, bake a bigger cake where everybody gets sort of this idea of the piece that we get is still bigger than if we all bake our own little cake. And I think that doesn't only go for, stakeholders in the traditional system, but also digital therapeutics companies. Like I would really urge everybody who is building a company now, even though you may be at your early stages, look out there at what other companies are doing at similar stages and think, can we already partner? And always keep this open mindset. And I think then we will end up with a bigger one piece of an ecosystem, which will in the end provide more value to the end user.
Let's bake a bigger cake is the right way to end this session. So I want to really thank each one of you for joining us. I've very much enjoyed it, and I hope the rest of our audience did too. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pascal.
Thank you.
Well, I think it was a fantastic panel, isn't it? Thank you very much, Pascal. Thank you very much to all of our experts.